about you guys.
She has a different voice and a different understanding.
Hello and welcome to Offsite Dirt. We're delivering high performance build today. My name is Mark Wille. I'm joined with my good friend Joe Konopacki of Insight Property Services. Joe, we go back a long ways. You're so talented in multiple areas, but give people a little rundown though of who you are and what Insight Property Services does before we dive in.
All right. Well, I'm a building consultant with a background in multi-unit property management, rehabs, remodels. A licensed home inspector, a BPI building analyst, resident rater, and we also do BPI training as well. So when people ask me what I do, I say explain buildings every day to everyone who will listen. Homeowners, contractors, code officials sometimes. Whoever needs, some understanding, because it's complicated stuff. There's a lot of interactions that are going on. And so, knowledge is great, but knowledge without understanding, can mislead you. You can kind of find yourself going off course. So really what I want people to do is, I want people to understand what we're talking about, so that they can find themselves in a unique situation or a novel situation and still kind of take it down to base principles and figure out what's going on. Those base principles of airflow, heat flow, and moisture flow. And Insight Property Services is a company I started in 2009, initially to do home inspections, but very quickly I parlayed my home inspection training right into building science training through BPI, and then became a resident HERS rater, and then started doing training literally within about a year of starting the business. We had an opportunity to organize BPI training, and then we started developing curricula and doing the training ourselves, and been doing that ever since. So we help people with their homes, whether they're buying them, selling them, building them new, or trying to make sense with what they've got. And with 3.5 million existing homes in the Chicagoland area, there's plenty of work to be done. There's plenty of homes that, existing homes that need some help, that need some guidance, so that they're relevant for the next 50 to 100 years.
Whether you're someone buying a home or selling a home or moving into one that's being leased or rented, a home inspector is typically involved, and then the Building Performance Institute and the HERS rating are other levels of education that you brought yourself into. And I've been involved in many of your presentations, and I think all of these things, regardless, there's true building science principles that get ushered forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's your ability to assess what you're able to see. Sometimes it's your ability to deliver what the naked eye isn't used to seeing. A day in the life, Joe. You have a great way of explaining, and I just love every topic we cover. In the beginning, it was radiant convection conduction, but there's so many formulaic ways you have to deliver. So let's start educating.
Sure. Well, you mentioned radiation, conduction, convection. Those are the mechanisms of heat flow, and we need to understand those, right? The sun is, radiating, to the earth and delivering heat that way, or cast iron radiator radiates heat across the room, right? That's your radiation. Heat transfer, through air or through space. Conduction, that's molecule to molecule heat transfer. I think of that as like I think conductor, train, right? If you ever heard a train, a locomotive hook into a train of, you know, a line of train cars, and you can hear that reverberation down the line. So that's how I think of conductive heat transfer. One energetic molecule hits the next one, hits the next one, hits the next one, and now you've got heat transfer through materials from one side to another. There's your conduction. And convection rate, you know, is your conveyor belt. Convection, right? We're picking it up on the high side, dumping it on the low side, right? On the warm side of a wall to the cold side of a wall, you know, on the warm side of a room to the cold side of the room. Yep. There's your conductive, you know, or convective transfer rather. So great. Those are your three basic mechanisms of heat transfer. But building science, the building science principles that we talk about also include airflow and moisture flow, right? Moisture, you know, we've got bulk moisture, you know, so gravity affects bulk moisture, snow, sleet, rain, sometimes hail. We had some pretty energetic hail. Just yesterday, we had some golf ball and billiard ball size hail hit around. That's a mess. We have capillarity. So this is moving against the force of gravity. The you know, masonry, concrete, wood, sucking water up vertically, you know, through a system. Then we have air transport. That's one that was kind of a bit of a surprise to me in getting into this, was how much moisture can be carried just by airflow, by humid air flowing from where the concentrations are high to where the concentrations are low. And then we have diffusion, which is what most people want to put before airflow, right? They're like, oh, you know, what's the permeability of that, you know, is that a vapor barrier? Is that a vapor retarder? What's the perm rating? And it's funny, most of those conversations, I have to stop them short and go, you're not even stopping the air leakage. Like, you've got holes, you've got penetrations, you've got untaped seams, you know, so they kind of jump past air leakage, go to diffusion. And I'm like, you don't have diffusion. You got too many holes to have diffusion. Diffusion only matters once all the holes are sealed.
Yep.
And as long as you have holes, it's air that's moving that moisture, right? So gravity, capillarity, airflow, and diffusion when we're talking about moisture flow. And then airflow, which was the biggest eye-opener for me. I mean, I described it to people like, when I learned about just the dynamics of airflow in homes and all the systems that are affected by it, it was like somebody handing me a pair of glasses after being nearsighted all my life. It was like, oh, holy cow. You know, like, I thought the world was fuzzy. Turns out there's very crisp, clean edges to it. So with airflow, you know, we've got three mechanisms of airflow. We got stack effect, wind effect, and mechanical pressures, right? So stack effect is just temperature differences. So that relates back to our convective heat transport. So convection and stack effect are kind of soup and sandwich, right? They're related there. Then we've got our wind transport, which again, there's a convective component to that, but I mean, really, you know, it's big, right? I mean, when winds are happening, sure, if you look at a global scale, there's a convective loop happening there, but we are on one small little section. We really only care about the wind that's hitting us from the north and going to the south, right? So we're seeing just a tiny section of that, you know, globally sized, you know, or at least hemispherically sized, like convective loop. And then mechanical pressures, which again are often underestimated in homes. Older homes had very few mechanical, you know, systems moving air around. You know, you go to an old brick house, there's no exhaust fans. The dryer is exhausting into the basement. You know, there's no bath fans, there's no range hood. Some homes don't even have forced air system. They just got, you know, radiators and, you know, window ACs, if that. So when we started getting into, you know, learning about airflow, and then you have the issues with the air moving, turning fibrous insulation into filter.
Yes.
You know, so you're like, oh, I've got insulation in the walls. I'm like, well, if you've got air leakage through it, you have air filters in your wall. And the unfortunate R value of an air filter is 0.
Right.
So, even though it says insulation on the paper, it's acting as filter, and with an R value of 0, which, really turns, heating and cooling loads on their heads. So, but the air leakage component was, again, just the biggest eye opener to me. And being able to, once you understand the mechanisms of airflow, what systems are responsible for moving air in and around and through a house. Now you get some fighting chance of kind of teasing apart a problem and getting to the underlying cause of it. And when it comes to airflow, I mean, effectively, if the holes are big, you're sealing holes. If the holes are few and small, then you're trying to manipulate pressures. But there's no point in trying to manipulate pressures if the holes are big and sloppy, right? So first we got to make the place relatively tight. And then the tighter it gets, the more we can start playing with pressures, or we have to start paying attention to pressures in the house. So that's kind of a broad overview of our building, or, the principles behind building science, right? Airflow, heat flow, moisture flow, and understanding the kind of the mechanisms of each one of those.
Exploring buildings as a kid, when looking at through the vision that I have today, was such a learning lesson, right? So go to grandma's house. She lives off of an alley. It's all stacked stone foundation, and the basement is always musty. The only time we enjoyed it is when you open up those doors on the outside of the basement for that stairwell, and the air
Bulkhead.
rushed in and the sunlight rushed in, and all of a sudden that basement was okay. Same thing, you go up to the attic during the summertime, and it always smelled burnt. Well, lo and behold, once you brought that flashlight in, you realize that the entire attic was charred, right? It was all the wood surface, Joe, was charred because all that heat went in there and it wasn't vented. It got trapped.
It was just kind of slowly cooking the wood every season. It was just drying. It's like a big kiln.
Well, I remember the first time I went up there, I was like 8 years old, and I was like, do we have a fire? Was there a fire sometime? And of course there was no insulation in this wonderful house from 1890 something. But yeah, it was just baking and charring over time. Thankfully all that asphalt on the outside was keeping it
Well,
safe. But this is
that asphalt's a heat battery, man. It literally, it's like a thermal battery. It loads with radiant energy all day long. And then it spends time trying to radiate, or re-radiate its heat down to the cooler house.
Yep.
And it's not until it faces a night sky that it can radiate its heat off into space.
That's a great that's a great thing to say, and I don't know that everyone gets that. The night sky of this energy leaving to outer space. I've always loved the analogy. I don't know how you deliver it so people could get it. Can you help with that?
Well, I mean, this is the thing that, in deserts, one of the weird dichotomy there is it gets crazy hot during the day and gets like freezing cold at night. And you're like, if it got so hot during the day, why was it so cold at night? Because it's moisture in the atmosphere that helps to retain that heat, right? So if there's no moisture in the soil or in the air, which it's not, because deserts are really dry, right? So, and some of that moisture in the air, the clouds can provide shade to limit the heating of the ground, right? So if there's no water vapor, there's no clouds, there's no shade, and then as soon as, your spot on Earth is no longer facing the sun, it's facing the night sky. Now you've got no clouds to dampen that heat loss. So all your, all the warm surfaces are now radiating to absolute zero space. There's no water vapor in the atmosphere, or little water vapor to heat up. There's no clouds to block any of that transfer. So it's crazy to see, and we've seen it where, I mean, in our area, there are times where it'll be 40 degrees, so above freezing, cold, but above freezing, but you'll still have frost formation on the roof. And it was because the roof was looking at absolute zero space.
Right.
just thrown its heat off, and it actually got down below atmospheric air temperature because it had nothing, stopping that radiant heat transfer to 0 degree space. So radiant nighttime cooling can be significant, and you'll often see condensation in an attic early in the morning because the roof got just literally threw off all its heat at night because of a clear night sky, right? So cloudy days help to kind of retain heat towards the earth and help to limit the radiant heating during the day. But
So
that relies on some water vapor in the air.
yeah, and to tease people with another one, that difference of the outside temperature and the inside temperature is one thing during the day. Of course, it could be an entirely different thing at night, but we look at that as the delta T, right?
Yep, difference in temperature or change of temperature, however you want to look at it.
Yep. So exploring these topics, um, what are the aha moments when you're talking with people when they say, I get it? Can you give an example of an aha moment where you're describing this and people all of a sudden click?
So there was every once in a while we have I had a remodeling company. I'd been talking with the owners, and they said, hey, maybe you can come and teach a class to our guys about common things you see as a home inspector, as a building consultant, so that our guys at least know to look out for it, so they don't make those mistakes, and embarrass ourselves, and so for the most part, we ended up talking about some basic, moisture management stuff like kick out flashings and those kind of things, but really airflow. The airflow thing was the biggest new thing for them, right? It is its pervasiveness of moving things around a building underestimated. So
Yep.
of course we're talking about, the basics of, air, heat flow, moisture flow, and airflow. And I told all these guys, like, listen, you've been doing remodeling longer than I have, right? And I've done a fair amount of it myself, but I mean, these guys are doing it day in, day out for the last 30 years. I'm like, you have seen everything that I've seen and probably more. So all of those case studies, all of those, issues, are swimming around in your head in some unorganized fashion, right? It's almost like a pot of boiling water that you're trying to make rock candy, and you've just dumped 2 sacks of sugar in this pot of water, and you're like, where'd all that sugar go? I can't believe it all dissolved into that pot of water. So you got this like syrupy slew of water with salt, with sugar in it, but it's all unorganized, right? It's just dissolved in there. And when you're making rock candy, you drop in, your seed crystal. You drop in that string that's got the, the sugar crystals on it, and all of that mess of sugar in there organizes itself onto that string, and now you've got this beautiful crystal, this organized collection of sugar on your rock candy, right? And when I still remember to this day, there was one of the project managers. I saw his face. I saw everything click. I saw the building science principles click. And when it happened, it was like all of those case studies organized themselves mentally for him. Instant rock candy, in his mind, where he was, remember the Mitchell's place, and you remember Mrs. Johnson, and you remember, like, it all made sense to him. Like in an instant, as fast as he could recall a scenario, he had the answer to the thing that didn't make sense to him. Right.
Nothing makes sense until it all makes sense. And then, right, eyes wide open. I think from now on, when I see it at events, Joe, I'm going to call it the rock candy moment. Just happened.
It crystallizes, right? All of that disparate knowledge. You have now a framework upon which to organize all that knowledge.
Perfect.
Right? And that's when you really understand something, is because you can take a novel situation and you can say, okay, I can understand it by this aspect of heat flow, this aspect of airflow, and this aspect of moisture flow. This is what's happening, And it doesn't scare you anymore, because you're like, you can always strip it down to the basic dynamics and go, I've never seen anything like this before, but I know that air does this and heat does that and moisture does that. And so what aspects are in play right here, you know, and boom, you've got it. Right. So, I mean, it's, you know, people, you know, will say like, you've probably never seen anything like this. And well, one, chances are I have. And two, even if I haven't, I'm not scared to go into a novel situation, because I know how air flows, how heat flows, and how moisture flows. And
Yep.
so it might be a new combination, but you know, it's not going to be, we're not seeing new dynamics.
So years and years have gone by between us, and we've now explored conversations, Joe, not just in Illinois and a big city called Chicago, but we've also explored them together in Kansas City. We've also explored them in Wisconsin, and we've also
Vegas.
explored them in Nevada, right?
Yep.
So I can't wait to the next state that we get to explore things together. And to everyone out there, Joe Konopacki, Inside Property Services, we are going to be coming back together again and again, and we're going to keep bringing you forward on these building science principles. Joe, thanks for being a part of Offsite Dirt and the High Performance Build Series. I love it, brother. Mark,
thanks for inviting me. Thanks to Audrey for opening the door for both of us. And I appreciate the conversations.
Okay. We'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.